Clap, clap, clap. There's folks cheering you on. So thank you all and welcome all to the 2020 UNCG McNair Virtual Summer Research Symposium. I am Carla Fullwood. I serve as the Assistant Director for the McNair Scholars Program. And today we have our first panel of scholars, McNair scholars, who engaged in summer research during our Summer Research Institute. And this panel is an opportunity for them to talk a little bit more about their research topic and their summer experience. We do encourage you attendees to please visit our Google site that was sent in the email. I will add it to the chat function. But there is a site where you can actually see all of our scholars' presentations. They have YouTube presentations. They will not fully represent those presentations, but this opportunity is for them to talk a little bit more about their learning process, about their research, and to have a conversation with you as attendees about that. Just to share a little bit more in depth about what is the Summer Research Institute. So to take a step back, first of all, the McNair Scholars Program is a grant-funded program at UNCG that supports high-achieving students who also identify as first-generation low-income and or underrepresented students to support these individuals in undergraduate research as well as their pursuit for PhD degrees. The Summer Research Institute is one of our, is central to our mission, where it's pretty much, and our scholars may attest to this, it's an intense 8-week experience that simulates the graduate school experience. Though several of us on this call have been in graduate school and or PhD and know that research takes, several weeks, months, even years, but these scholars had an opportunity to get a snapshot of what that can look like and feel like over an 8-week experience, while also taking classes that prepared them for the GREs, understanding the graduate school application process, and a writing seminar to continue to think about how they are writing for research. And so the panel today is an opportunity for our scholars to share again what they did, what they learned, and what they plan on doing moving forward. So I am going to start in alphabetical order from how folks are listed on the website. And I'm going to ask scholars the first question to introduce yourselves. If you can introduce yourself, your not only your name, but your major, your year, and a little bit about what was your research about, your research topic. Yeah, just a short description of your research. And for today's panel, we will start with Marcus Batts.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marcus Batts. My major is kinesiology. I am majoring in kinesiology. My research topic is investigating the bidirectional associations between stress, activity-related behaviors, such as physical activity and sedentary behavior, which is sitting, and sleep quality of my African-American college freshmen.
Thank you. Next, I have Laci Gray.
Hi, I'm Laci Gray. I'm a psychology major and I'll be a 4th-year student in the fall, so in like a month. My faculty advisors were Dr. Rosemary Nelson Gray, Dr. Peter Delaney, and my summer research project, I really wanted to combine clinical psychology and cognitive psychology. So what I did was I looked at people with varying levels of borderline personality disorder traits, which can be quite a debilitating disorder for most people that have it. And I looked at their memories, or more specifically, their ability to forget certain information that was either negative in general or negative and also related to their disorder.
Thank you, Laci. Korrey, Scholar Korrey Monroe.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Korrey Monroe. I'm a rising junior at UNCG, and my major is public health with a minor in African American, African diaspora studies. And my research project was about discrimination and challenges Black communities in the United States healthcare system. So basically, I examined the healthcare system, and then we looked at the Black communities and how things are going on with all that's going on with COVID and things like that, and the different challenges and factors that that makes healthcare really hard for Black communities to receive.
Thank you, Korrey. Scholar Nahdira Rollins.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nahdira Rollins. I'm a senior psychology major with a minor in American Sign Language. My project this summer was in personality and creativity psychology. I looked into whether people who experience aesthetic chills, as in, chills down the spine, goosebumps, feelings of awe, while having an aesthetic experience, which means listening to music or studying nature, looking at space, things like that. I wanted to see if that was correlated with creativity, so if it made you more creative.
Thank you, Nahdira. Scholar Demi Smalls.
Hello, my name is Demi Smalls, and I'm a special education major with a concentration in history. And my research was focused on transgenerational trauma and the effects that it has on Black students' educational outcomes. So we looked at school completion rates, discipline rates, such as exclusionary practices, including suspension and being expelled. And we also looked at the way that teacher mismatch contribute to that, along with the trauma that students face in environments outside of school and within the school.
Thank you, Demi. And Scholar Jacqueline Sandoval.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Sandoval. I'm a senior majoring in public health with a minor in Spanish. And this summer, I worked with Dr. Sandra Echeverria, and our research is on the multi-level diabetes disparities among the Latinx population. And the goal of my research was just to comprehensively look at the multiple levels of influence that are associated with prediabetes, prediabetes prevalence among the Latinx community. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thank you. So before we go further into our questions, scholars, I do want to share with you all, and again with our panelists, what will happen. We will first, I have about 4 questions. We'll engage in a conversation with just our panelists, again, so they can share what they learned, what they would have done differently, what they plan on doing next with their research. I ask you as attendees, if you have questions, we will invite you to engage in conversation and ask our panelists questions. And if you can note those questions, I hope the question function is enabled for you. You can ask those questions in that Q&A box, and I can moderate and ask those as well after the scholars have answered the moderated panel discussion questions. And yeah, moving forward. So I have question 2, and I'm sending this to you all panelists, but I'll say, talk a bit about what you learned over the summer. What did you learn about your topic as you were conducting research during the Summer Research Institute? And perhaps what surprised you? You all worked on proposals, or some of you were going a little bit deeper into your proposals during the summer research, but you had in mind a little bit about what you was interested in. What surprised you? What did you learn and what surprised you throughout the process? I can say we can go popcorn style.
I can start.
Thanks, Demi.
So as far as learning about my topic, I learned so much because it's not something that I have been focusing on as a special education major, but so my topic started because of epigenetics, which is the way that trauma affects like your genes. Now, mind you, I told y'all my major is special education. Biology is nowhere in there. So working with Dr. Holzberg, we kind of started looking more into what it could look like on the side of education, which is where transgenerational trauma kind of formed. So I really learned about the outcomes for Black students and the way that they're being pushed further into the school to prison pipeline because of the way that their trauma is formed, but then the lack of cultural awareness. And honestly, it's a system. It's not one teacher saying, okay, I don't want this kid here. It's the way that the system is formed with policies like zero tolerance. So with that being said, I think one of the most surprising things about research during this time was the fact that I didn't know how to write. Like, and that sounds very like, what you mean you don't know how to write? But writing for research is very different from writing a paper to get the A. It's about writing to not only state what the research is saying without stating what you can see or what you think. So I spent a lot of this process learning all the things that you don't learn in undergrad. So learning to write, learning to research, learning to read, all of those things that you think you learned in kindergarten. Yeah, no, you didn't. Congrats. So yeah, that's kind of was my process and some of the things that I learned.
Thank you.
I can go next. So the majority of like novel information that I learned was on the cognitive psychology side about memory, how our brains work when we're trying to remember or forget something, because I've been in the borderline personality disorder lab at UNCG for the past 3 years. So I have a pretty okay background on that, but for those of you guys in the audience that don't really know what it is a personality disorder that affects pretty much all facets of one's life that has the disorder. It's characterized by very explosive relationships and very intense moods, particularly negative ones. So what I learned about my topic, like I said, was more on the cognitive psychology side. So like, for example, just regular people like you or I, we have a difficult time letting go of emotional information. So like if something emotional happened to me, I wouldn't be able to forget it immediately. It would take some time. And that effect is strengthened if there are, say, 2 or more emotional things that happen to me and they're related to one another. So, and I think that's very applicable in everyone's life. When we have emotional things happen to us, it's good to know why it's not like that we can forget about them and move on. And something that surprised me during the research process is all the data that I had to look at. When you read a scholarly article, the results section with all the data and it's like already interpreted, it's clean, there's graphs, there's charts. That's even difficult for a lot of people to read, but then when you actually do research yourself, you have all of the raw data to look at that has not been cleaned up and it's not already in charts. You have to make those charts yourself, you have to make the graphs, and you have to interpret what the data is saying. So it's not like you do your research and then at the end there's like a text box and it says what it means. You have to figure out what it means yourself, which I found to be kind of fun and also very overwhelming because I've never done it before. So that was a little surprising.
I would imagine that's similar to most of you then, and I'm excited to hear that because that's part of the process of learning what research is about and what that can look like. Others, who's next?
I'll go next. Yep, I definitely was on the same track as Laci when it came to doing things that aren't really in what you're used to. Like I'm basically the opposite. I spent most of my time in a cognitive psychology lab, and then I moved to creativity and personality, which is almost similar, but not quite enough that I felt super comfortable. And so after, learning all these new definitions that, you spend so much time thinking like, okay, I know psychology, I'm good. And then you're like, wait, I don't know anything about this topic. So I learned a lot about, creativity, aesthetics, which is good because that's what I want to, have a career in. And something that surprised me was also definitely just having a whole bunch of data and not knowing what to do with it. Like, I spent a good few days trying to figure out how to do it by myself just to see if I could, and I could not. I absolutely could not. Just highlighting and, circling things like, does this mean anything? And then once you go to your mentor, like, does this make sense? And he's like, no, it's not like that. So it was really helpful to have a mentor because like they've done it before. And so the things that surprise you are just like 10 seconds to them. It's really cool.
That's awesome. And I do want to give a quick clarification and shout out to your mention of mentors, Nahdira. So for those who may not be familiar with our program, the scholars not only engaged in summer research, but worked with faculty mentors. And so faculty who also either are pursuing or have pursued or have completed their PhDs, and also worked with library mentors. So thank you, and I'll do this again and share thanks to all of our faculty mentors and our librarian staff at the Jackson Library for the support that they've given and the guidance that they continue to give to our scholars over the summer. So thanks for that mention, Nahdira. Who's next? What did you learn and what surprised you?
I can go next. So originally my research project was looking at just diabetes itself. And then while I was reading the literature, the term pre-diabetes kept coming up. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, okay, like this is an area that can be used as a preventative strategy, or like more preventative measures can be taken for pre-diabetes. And so I switched up my topic a little bit and focused on pre-diabetes instead of diabetes. And pre-diabetes is just like a really acute form of diabetes, and to the point where a person who has pre-diabetes won't know because the symptoms are like so normal. Like you may be more thirsty. What are some other things? Yeah, like they're like really normal things that you won't consider like as symptoms. And so a lot of people won't know that they have it. And so when I was looking through more finding more literature that was like support my topic, it was a hard time to find literature like behind prediabetes. So that itself is a huge gap and is definitely something that we need to talk about in the public health profession. And so that was frustrating, but I was able to find some journal articles that contributed a lot to that discussion, and it just reminded me why like I want to do this. I want to contribute to that conversation as well. And even though like my project didn't like comprehensively look at everything, I do feel like proud in a way that I am still bringing attention to this topic. But I think one thing that I did learn is that there are so many like preventative strategies and measures that can be taken to address prediabetes to delay the onset of diabetes itself. So I would like to further like do more research and see what I can find, what other barriers that I didn't think about, and do more lit review for sure. But yeah.
Exciting. And there is a comment from Jackie Mayer in the chat box in relation to Nahdira's comment, and I think also similar to some of Jackie's notes. Part of what our scholars are doing is adding fresh new perspectives to, research that either has been done or hasn't even been tapped into yet or enough. So I think that's awesome learning moments. Next, Korrey or Marcus, do you want to share what you learned and what surprised you?
Yes, I'll go. So when focusing on my research with my faculty mentor, Dr. Marr, I know a lot of times during our meetings, we discuss heavily on the lifestyle factors that I was focusing on, such as physical activity, sedentary behavior, stress, and sleep quality. I know like it was discussed that that not a lot of people may particularly experience such influences on like physical activity affecting the levels of stress that college students experience. Like everybody's not going to have the same influence pertaining to those lifestyle factors. So what may cause one person to increase in levels of stress when engaging in physical activity, that may not be the case for other people. And so that's why it was like heavily encouraged for me to focus on like the bidirectional relationships regarding physical activity, stress, and sleep quality, meaning as if you focus on how sleep quality affects stress, like don't just focus on the one directional relationship, but focus also on how stress affects sleep quality as well, to be able to get a better idea of how it affects each college student instead of just focusing on one directional relationships, like past studies that I've engaged in when doing research on the literature part. And so I was also surprised to see that it was a lot of studies that reflected that African Americans are at high risk of obesity due to these lifestyle factors of physical activity, stress, and sleep quality. So I was very surprised to see that. But again, going back to what I learned about my topic, it was just important to really assess the relationships between the variables of physical activity and stress and sleep quality, and not just looking at it at a one directional relationship.
Thank you.
So from my project and what I've learned, my project is fairly relative with all that's going on related to COVID and the United States healthcare system in Black communities. And if you look at the news, Black communities are leading the mortality rates each day more and more. And that's due to the fact of the lack of accessibility to healthcare. So my project, I did a lit review, an extensive literature review, and I was able to see the areas in which more research is needed. So I split everything up into different groups. So you have social factors, economic factors, and health factors. And each factor plays a huge role in being able to see how the Black medical physician, how their salary is fairly low in comparison to the average white medical physician. Seeing that discrepancy and noticing that although you might have everything that you need to be the best doctor in the world, if you're Black, you're still not going to get the full opportunity that you should get. So being able to see things that really upheld Black communities from thriving and being able to be healthy and getting the care that they need, it really shocked me. Because at the end of the day, we live in America where, it's equality and justice for all and things like that, but you can't even get justice in the healthcare system. So how do you expect to get justice anywhere else?
Yeah, Demi with the snaps. Yeah, wow, very impactful. And on a quick side note, Korrey, recently the New York Times race-related newsletter did a piece about racism as a public health issue. So I'm wondering if that could be a potential resource to look at and see what data they've gathered and who they've referenced in relation to your research. Okay, enough of my side notes. Thank you all. Again, it seems like very similar to, you know, most research process. You learned a little bit more about your topic and delved into your interest a little bit deeper over the summer. And so with this next question, I want you to reflect on if resources and circumstances were a bit different. What would you have done differently? So to give some context, our scholars know, but you as attendees, traditionally the Summer Research Institute would have been an on-campus experience. Our scholars would have been on campus and had access to the library and perhaps access to respective communities and lots of different things that would have affected their research in different ways. But we're in a pandemic, and our scholars and their faculty mentors quickly figured out new ways to approach their research questions. So I want you to, if you haven't reflected on already, if we were in a non-remote, non-pandemic circumstance, but even aside from that, if you had more research dollars, like research funding, perhaps more time than 8 weeks, perhaps a research team, you know, if resources were unlimited and circumstances did not present barriers, what would you have done differently with your research? I can go in order of my screen if to not put people, well, it will put people on the spot, but let's start with Laci.
So if I had unlimited resources, well, first let me start off by saying all scholars that did research this summer, we had to do it online. So like, for example, Nahdira and myself and a few other scholars, we used a website called Amazon Mechanical Turk, which is basically where you send a link out to your survey, and people from all over the world that classify themselves as workers, they go to this link, they take your survey, and then we compensate them with money. Like, not a lot of money. My research compensated the participants with $3.25 for 30 minutes of their time. So if I had unlimited resources, I would definitely want to administer my survey in person, because when you do research online, there's a lot of area for misinterpretation. So the participants, not every single time they understood the instructions. So they just have to read the instructions from their home and try to interpret it as best they can. Even though I can be as clear as possible, some people are still gonna misconstrue what I want them to do. Also, when you do research online, there's a factor of, are the participants actually paying attention? Are they checking their phone? Are they Facebooking while they're supposed to be doing my survey? I have no idea. So I would definitely want to bring them into a lab and administer the survey myself. Another thing is I would use an actual clinical population. So a lot of research and clinical psychology, they use participants with a diagnosis of the disorder they're looking at. And I obviously couldn't do that. I don't have access to a clinic, but that would be the best way to ensure that my results, the effects, whatever effect I get, are due to either having the disorder or not having the disorder. So I would definitely want to work with people who have a borderline personality disorder rather than people who have a lot of traits that are high in borderline personality disorder.
Thank you. How about Nahdira?
Okay, if I had unlimited resources, I think I would have shifted my study from a correlational study to an experimental study, because like correlational studies are fine. I don't have anything against them, but I would really love to have, you know, manipulated variables, probably bring participants into a lab and have them, you know, do creative tasks instead of just asking online, you know, how are you doing X, you know, have you conducted X tasks lately? Do you think creatively in, you know, different aspects? And then I also would have had a better time without having participants online because of the same things Laci was talking about. A lot of issues with people going too quickly through the survey. Like you can just tell sometimes if someone just clicked like see every single time and finish the survey in like 2 minutes when it's supposed to take 10 to 15. And if we were in person, not only would we be able to like moderate that better, we'd also be able to take note of it quickly instead of having all the results come in at once and then you're like, what is this? Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Demi, what would you have done differently?
Okay, so if I had unlimited resources, I probably would have not done a literature review, but a mix of a literature review and probably more qualitative data in the community. Because one of the greatest, I don't want to say the greatest, but one of the most interesting things about my topic is the way that it's generational and it's a cycle. So there's, in my opinion, there's truly no beginning and currently there's no end because it just kind of keeps cycling. So with that being said, I would have liked to spend more time in the community, listening to their generations of trauma and the cycles that they experience and relating it to the educational outcomes, the school to prison pipeline, and the way that the school leads to prison and prison leads to lower outcomes in things like, say, health, as Korrey's talking about, or certain mental illnesses and things like that. And then we can continue the conversation about the way that we have to implement more restorative justice in the classroom to build our community in a way that students can learn to be emotionally intelligent in their speech and the way that they're feeling, and teachers are more culturally aware. There's not as big of a cultural disconnect in the teacher mismatch, and how we break that generational cycle, and how we lower the fact that African Americans have the highest incarceration rate in the United States, or that there are more African Americans incarcerated currently than there were slaves. So how do we stop these generational cycles so that transgenerational trauma stops in the community and in the classroom? So I would have liked to be in the community more.
Wow, thank you, Demi. Korrey.
Going off of what Demi said, because she also did the literature review, I would also go get into the community more, because with all that's going on, being able to interview people and hear their perspective on things, especially Black communities in healthcare, with COVID going on, you'll kind of be able to see just how large of an impact the government actually has on these communities. As far as time-wise, that would be my my limited resource, because doing the literature review, you're able to, have extensive research, kind of, sort of speaking, and you can go into like different databases and things, but it kind of felt rushed. I didn't get to really analyze as many texts as I wanted to, or going to, annotate these texts or understand them really for the most part, because there was a lot of literature on these topics that I researched. However, I just didn't have enough time to really explore them. So, yeah,
Thank you, Korrey. Jacqueline, what would you have done differently?
Yeah, so I think, well, my research is a secondary data analysis, so I had to look at 2 data sets, the National Health Interview Survey and the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. But I would have looked at more data sets just to get like more data and compare all of that to each other. And I feel like I would have seen a greater like disparity there too, or I would have found more striking things. But my mentor also has worked with a small clinic in Greensboro, and there's a lot of Latino and Hispanic patients that go there. So we would have also looked at their like electronic health records and see what we can find. And I would have also had the opportunity to interview the patients even and ask them about the barriers they face when accessing care or like diabetes, for diabetes management. And I would have loved to also look at each race and ethnicity and see like what, if there were any disparities there, because the data that I use kind of grouped Latinos and Hispanics, so there was room for like group analysis error. It wasn't that like, it may have been representative, but not for each ethnicity. So I would have loved to see like if Mexicans had like a higher prevalence for prediabetes compared to Puerto Ricans. But for this study, I only looked at non-Latino whites, US-born Latinos, and foreign-born Latinos. So yeah.
Korrey. I mean, not Korrey, Marcus.
So as for me, I think the one thing that I would have done differently, or what I would say more of, is if I had more time and resources. I don't think I would have conducted an online survey if it was, you know, permissible. I would have had the survey in person, so that way I could have basically had more of like that connection with the people who I was working with in the study of my research, and also spend more time assessing the things that attribute to stress when it comes to African American college freshmen, because mainly like within my research, I was assessing how, you know, stress may affect sleep quality and how sleep quality may affect stress. But I would have liked to focus and hone in more on what things attribute to the stress for African Americans in college institutions. And like it stems from a lot of things such as institutional and systemic racism. So I would have liked to hone in on those things more and kind of like figure out ways to make things more feasible for African American college students, and also focus more on a broader aspect of college students on different levels of classifications. Instead of just focusing on college freshmen, I would like to focus more so on sophomores and juniors and seniors as well, to kind of see how things like start within the developmental period as a freshman, how it transcends moving forward up classifications as a sophomore and a junior and a senior. So I would have liked to hone in more on the things that attribute to stress for African American college students, and then being able to basically make things better in a sense for those students as well.
Thank you. I do see a question that came in. Are you okay, panelists, if we switch it up a bit? Perhaps I can ask a question from our attendees before going into our last question. We do have a question from Joe Klein. I have a question for Laci and others who conducted surveys online regarding Laci's comment about online surveys and clinical diagnosed versus self-diagnosed symptoms of a disorder. Do you think your results from the online survey will better represent medically underserved groups who may be underdiagnosed? And could that outweigh the drawback of having self-diagnosed respondents who might not have the disorder included in the sample? So do y'all get this? Do y'all see the questions as panelists? Okay, cool. Because I was like, I'm gonna copy and paste this so that you can see the full question. But Laci, do you have thoughts on this question?
Yeah, so with using MTurk, the online database to get my study out there, I definitely got a much broader sample. So addressing the question of, do you think that in my sample, typically underrepresented populations, because maybe they don't get the diagnosis, maybe they don't have the resources to get the diagnosis, do you think, or do I think that those are more represented in my sample? I think that definitely that could be a possibility. I think that my sample is more diverse because I was able to go worldwide, even though most of the participants that responded were in like the Middle East, the United States, and Europe. But it's definitely more racially diverse than had I done the survey at UNCG. So if I would have done this survey in person, it would have been with UNCG students. And we already kind of have a set racial, ethnic makeup. Even though we're the most diverse UNC school, it's still like majority white students and then even smaller percentages of minority students. But of course, there's no way for me to tell unless I really further analyze the data if typically underrepresented populations are more represented in my study. But I think that that is a very good suggestion to follow up on, because maybe it would make doing the online stuff worth it to get those typically underrepresented populations represented in my study, because it's definitely a problem in psychology where most of the studies are done with white populations. They're not representative of minorities. And this kind of goes off of what Korrey's talking about, where underserved communities don't have the same resources to get diagnoses, to get treatment, stuff like that. So I hope that answered the question at least a little bit.
Thank you, Laci. So we are going to go into our last question, and then attendees, I do invite you to be prepared to ask questions of our panelists, either in the Q&A box or in the chat function. So start thinking about questions you may have for our scholars. So scholars, in the chat box, I also included our last question. What do you plan on doing moving forward? You spent 8 weeks. Some of you, I know that some of you are continuing in different ways. Just share a little bit about what are your plans from what you learned, what you would have done differently. What are your plans moving forward with your research? And we can do popcorn. Would that work?
I could start. One thing that I'm hoping to do this fall is to possibly, what's it called? Redo my correlational study, because I want to look further into the online methods and hopefully reach further out and maybe have different groups done. So maybe there would be an MTurk population, but I could also look at the student population of UNCG and maybe reach out further to different universities and have the online surveys done. And then I would also like to possibly expand my questions further to get more specific about my questions with creativity and maybe make it a little longer. So that could be something that I start in the fall.
Thanks, Nahdira. Who's next?
So I'll go. My bad, Jackie. So in the fall and just the upcoming school semester in general, I'm looking to hone in on the mental health of African American college students and focus in on those things. I want to spend more time on that because I have like a high interest for the mental health of African American college students, and so I want to focus on that and develop questions that can be sent out in a survey for students to answer that basically ask questions reflecting on their mental health to kind of get a better idea of each student's college experience. And so I would like to get that, that practice and that experience as well as getting into the lab, which is something that I was not able to do during this summer research institute. So I look forward to doing that during this upcoming school year.
I can go. So there's still a bit of like logistics to figure out and discuss, but hopefully my mentor and her colleagues and I, we can work like an extension of my paper that goes more in depth about the multiple levels of influence that I talked about, and even look at race and ethnicity differences, and look at like state level differences in diabetes, self-management access, and hopefully publish that paper. Hopefully I can get that done before I graduate, so I have my name out there, but I don't know, I don't want to rush it, so we'll see.
I can go. So one thing my mentor has told me since we started this was you have a lifetime worth of work. Because transgenerational trauma is a relatively, I don't want to say a relatively new topic, but there's not a lot of research on it, especially when you're talking about African Americans. If we're looking at, say, Holocaust survivors, there's research on historical trauma and some transgenerational trauma, but African Americans is very light. Our goal is to finish a manuscript and to be published in the fall on the current topic, and hopefully start a few new topics about implications for practice and ways that we can really start having this conversation about how to talk about restorative justice and practices where you don't have to send the kid out of the classroom to be disciplined, where that leads to them being sent out of the school to get in trouble in the community, where they end up in juvenile detention and so forth. So we really want to talk about how do we break the cycle.
My plans with my research after the SRI is to continue this with my faculty mentor, Dr. Haywan Germa, in the fall. We have a fall research project through URCA entitled Ethnic Diversity Within Black Populations in the U.S. So the information that I've researched and taken in from my literature review will be incorporated into that.
Going off of what Korrey said, I also have the URCA grant to continue my research into the fall, and that will be serving as my disciplinary honors research project. So I kind of got really lucky. I feel very fortunate to have had the McNair opportunity, because this research kind of serves as the pilot research, or like the backbone of my study that's going to be conducted in the fall. So in the fall, I'm going to be addressing the limitations of my summer study and hopefully crafting the perfect study, because I had the opportunity to already do it once. And so in the fall, hopefully it'll be much better. The results that it will yield will be even more interpretable than the results that the summer study yielded. And also, I'm looking to submit my paper for publication. I'm going to mesh my McNair paper with my disciplinary honors paper together into like one mega paper with the help of my faculty mentors, and hopefully submit that for publication and get my name out there like Jacqueline said.
This is super exciting. You know, the ultimately it's exciting that you all are continuing it, your deep dive in one way or another, whether it's for publication or to address some of the barriers working remotely, or just general research barriers that come up. That's a part of the research process, and it's exciting that you all are looking at ways to continue the work that you've done. So thank you. And on that note, let's see what questions we have from our attendees. We do have a question. Oh, I think this is Taishay. You all see the question again, panelists? Do you feel your participation in research has given you skills to increase your success in other academic areas? If so, what's one skill you would say you are taking forward?
definitely how to write. Definitely writing. That's super helpful.
I would say flexibility, or being like adaptable, because this whole summer has been just doing that. And, you know, I'm someone who has been conditioned to like stick to deadlines, stick to a schedule. But with research and with other things like academic related things, it's not always the best thing to go into like having just like a restricted like outlook or like have a plan for yourself, because it could mess you up at times. I mean, time management is definitely like a good skill to have, but also being like flexible, because you never know when things are going to come up and may change your like area of focus. You might find something that is like, oh, like there's more attention that there needs to be more attention here. And so kind of being like flexible and adaptable. It's still something I'm like kind of working on, kind of stretching that muscle in the brain, but I'm working on it.
I would say I learned the opposite skill what Jackie just described, because my mind is kind of like a mind map. So I really learned how to be more linear this summer, and work like strictly from a treatment outline, because I can start on topic A, go through Z, go Z to A and back and forth and just bounce. So I really learned how to hone in on one thing and start it and finish it. And I think that's also one of the things that I'm most proud of this summer. I started a project and I finished it and I didn't stray too much.
I agree 100% with what's already been said, 1,000% with writing. I feel like I'm a much better writer, but I will add that I've learned how to take constructive criticism better, because I have sent my paper to my faculty mentors so many times. And each time they come back with very helpful comments, very much constructive criticism. But after so many times, it's like, am I not done yet? How is there more things to fix? But it's really not personal. And I think that's a very important lesson to learn, that it's not personal, and constructive criticism only is there to help you improve.
I can also, going off of what Laci said about being able to take constructive criticism. I know as for me in my process, whenever it came down to learning about how to write in my discipline, initially it was a lot of, room for growth, and there still is, but, I didn't initially understand what's with all the errors and this, that, and the third. And it was just because my faculty mentor was really challenging me to really, hone in on my skills of being able to write within my discipline. And I appreciate her for that, because at the time I just didn't understand when I was initially learning how to write within my discipline. So it was just being able to understand and take constructive criticism, as well as being able to take the literature that I was given to read and finding for myself to really break down and understand the concepts of what was being, portrayed within the reading. So that's another skill that I have obtained as well.
I agree with the rest of my peers. Writing wise, like writing within my discipline, that's something that's fresh to me. And like just having the guidance from my mentor and from my library mentor, Sam Harlow, just having their guidance, it really helped me. Another thing that I learned this summer was probably organization. I'm gonna take that with me all the way. I had a late start in comparison to my peers. I started in May with my proposal and everything like that. So playing the game of catch up and sticking to a strict schedule, that was it was a challenge, but we got through it. We all got through this. All right, it was very harsh 8 weeks, but we made it.
These are wonderful lessons learned, and definitely lessons that you'll take with you the rest of your bachelor's degree, undergraduate years to beyond. I reflect back on a point Demi made earlier. There is a difference in writing for research versus just writing a paper to get the A, and how that translates, especially in topics that you're super passionate about. Looking at the chat function, we do have a question from Gerald Holmes. Hi, Gerald. Can folks share? Please share the library databases and resources that you used for the first time in your research.
I can start with this one. I just want to give a quick shout out to APA Psych Info, the database. We're best friends. I know APA Psych Info like the back of my hand. When at the beginning of the year, I was just kind of figuring it out, but it's like bookmarked on my computer, and I used it every single day when I was doing my literature review for my research.
Following up on that, my library mentor, Amy, is a magician. I would send her things like, okay, so we want to talk about transgenerational trauma and educational outcomes for Black students. And then like, we'll be on Zoom, and next thing I know, she got 25 articles, and I'm like, how are you doing this? And like, I would say, okay, I'm gonna try it. And I would try it and come up with nothing. Like, it would be like, error. And I'm like, I did exactly what she just did. So I don't know how she did it, but she's a complete magician. I love it. I love her. And I'm very grateful to have a library mentor.
I used PubMed for the first time, and man, PubMed is great. Like, I really found everything I ever needed on there. And I used a bit of EBSCO too. And for the first time, I also used those data sets that I mentioned earlier, like NHIS and NHANES, a little bit of Breakfast. So that was quite an adventure to look at and analyze the data because it was hard.
Yeah, I used the same databases as Jackie, being in public health and stuff, but I also used ToxNet just to see like medicine and things like that, and also used some medical databases as well as the CDC. It really helped me.
Okay. I think that was everyone, right?
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Let me go.
Oh,
I don't believe when I say anything. I used the National Library of Medicine. I used quite a few sources from there to find some of the information literature that I was looking for to talk about the bidirectional associations between my factors of stress, sleep quality, and activity-related behaviors. So I definitely, honed in on that website a lot for my sources.
I ended up also using APA PsycInfo a lot, and that led me to looking into the specific journals of my discipline. So once I get that money, I might have a subscription to, the specific journals of, like creativity in the arts or psychology of creativity and things like that. Those were pretty neat finds for the summer.
Awesome. I'm filtering through questions. The chat function panelists, you have a lot of folks giving you shout outs and great jobs and congratulations, empathy and support. There is another question from Dr. Gurma. As a community of scholars, how did you work together and help one another in your projects? In addition to the support that you received from faculty and library mentors. So how did you work together? How did you support each other?
So I guess I'll go first. Speaking from my experiences, I want to first say I am truly grateful for my cohort because being able to get feedback from them on my research was definitely, appreciative. I definitely am grateful for that. And also, aside from being able to get feedback from it pertaining to my research, it was also emotional support as well because, there were some days to where we may not have felt as motivated to really push through this process through the Research Institute. So aside from being able to get feedback to grow and develop within our topics, we were also I was also able to get emotional support from them. So it's unfortunate that I wasn't able to, I would say, bond with them in person due to circumstances, but I am, grateful for my cohort and, the type of support that they were able to show even through, the barriers that were between us.
I'll definitely second what Marcus is saying. We were all really connected in that we could, not only in classes when we could see, like, you can just look and see how the weeks are wearing down on everyone, which is really helpful because as we're all, like alone in our houses, it can feel really lonely, and it helps to see that, it's not just you. But we were also able to, ask for help sometimes, especially from people in similar disciplines, which was super helpful with, resources and finding out that, like, oh, hey, Laci's also using the same, she's using MTurk too. Maybe if I have issues, I can go to her about things and things like that. It was great.
I'll definitely say that we were struggling together at times, and that was comforting to struggle in solidarity with my cohort, because it just reinforces, it lets you know that you're not alone going through this crazy summer research institute. It's only 8 weeks, and we also had classes, and almost everybody's taking the GRE. So it was nice to know that literally every one of my cohort is going through the same thing, and we're all just as stressed.
I would definitely agree with Laci. The struggling together was real and was probably the best part of working together, because currently in our cohort there's two education majors. So like there's not really much exchange on the topics, but like understanding like we're all working toward this kind of common goal definitely made it easier and a lot more comfortable.
Yeah, most definitely what everybody's saying. Being able to get feedback from everyone in your cohort, even in like our writing class, we were able to, give each other feedback and revise and edit each other's papers, and I feel like that made our work become greater. But from a social perspective, we was all there for each other, and we made sure we held each other accountable. We made sure everybody did their thing. We all made it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with like what everyone said. I don't have anything to add.
I think what I'm hearing is community is key. And that's something I encourage you to think and keep with you moving forward as you engage in research, and definitely at the graduate level. Who's in your community, whether they're studying and researching the same thing as you or not. Who are your support systems? Who are folks to have late night research sessions, coffee breaks, vent sessions, identifying members of your community to support you. Yeah, Nahdira.
You just reminded me of like how interdisciplinary this could get, in that like in some writing groups during class, we were with people who had like nothing to do with our subjects, and at first all of us were like, why would you do this? And then we realized that there are a lot of things that can be helpful in one discipline that you don't notice until you look at it from another. Like I was creating an abstract, and Sarah, who is in a completely different discipline, noticed that the way that she wrote hers could also be really helpful in how I was writing mine. And so I tried it out, and I didn't end up using it, but it was a super helpful suggestion that ended up really contributing to my final abstract. And like, I wouldn't have even thought of it if it wasn't for her coming from that completely different perspective. And I think that might have happened for a lot of us. It was really nice. It was helpful.
Good deal. So we have 3 more questions. Okay, y'all good so far? I'm gonna start with question from an anonymous attendee. How many of you identify as first generation students? And how did your families react to your acceptance to the McNair program and to your research? And what type of support did you receive from them? So how many of you identify as first generation, the support or reaction from family about research, and particularly even researching from home, and what did the support look like? Whoever wants to answer. Well, if you identify as a first generation.
So I identify as a first generation college student, and when my parents came to like my induction ceremony, or even when I first told them that I got accepted to the program, they weren't really sure like what it was. Like I tried to explain it to them in a simple way, but they just didn't get it. But they were proud nonetheless. So when they came to my ceremony, they were like, oh wow, like this is a pretty like big deal, because it was so fancy. There were a lot of people, we were dressed nice, but they were really, really proud. And there were just days or evenings where I just didn't have the mental energy to really talk to them because of how tired I was from doing research that day. And they were really understanding. My mom made me like my favorite meals at times to just like keep me like alive. And you know, so all of it was like definitely worth it, because just knowing that I made my parents proud, like wow, a really like awesome feeling. Yeah.
I'm also a first generation college student, and unfortunately I didn't get to go to the induction ceremony because I was abroad when I was inducted, so it was like extra crazy. But I remember calling home and being like, should I accept it? I don't know what to do. I really miss you guys. Tell me what to do, please. And they were very supportive throughout the whole thing, even though I'm sure at times they had no idea what I was talking about. They still were so supportive. I could tell them nonsense, gibberish, and they would be like, wow, Laci, I'm so proud of you. And sometimes you just need to hear that. And it was very nice to have them always standing behind me.
I also identify as a first generation student, and my reaction, well, the reaction from my family was kind of funny when I initially told them that I was inducted, because they didn't know, they are not familiar with the program. So it was like, oh my God, we're proud of you. And then it was like, what's McNair? I was like, okay, let me go ahead and break it down for y'all. But you know, after explaining to them what it is and how it basically caters to underrepresented minority students in college, they were very excited. And then after telling them what I'm looking to do research on, at the time, I didn't necessarily have like all the things put into place into perspective as to how the research would look, but I knew of the idea of what I was wanting to do. And after I told them, you know, they were just supportive and they were happy. And they was just like, you know, do great things within your research, because you know, it's going to go a long way than just your campus. It may touch, you know, a lot of people's, you know, like heart, you know, so do great things. And then, you know, that's what I'm planning to do.
I'm a first generation college student as well. And it was actually my mom who knew about the McNair program and then told me about it. And so once I was like, yeah, I got in, and she was like, thank you. I knew it. And I was like, oh, okay. Because you know how parents are, and they're like, you know, here's what's best for you. And you're like, sure, mom. But sometimes my mom just turns into like Candace, and she knows everything. And she's like, I know this will be right for you. And so my family was also a huge help during the Summer Research Institute, because if that's one thing I'm grateful for, it's that I got to spend the whole time surrounded by that support system. So I'd be able to tell them, you know, like, oh, I really don't feel like doing this today. And they're like, well, they wouldn't, you know, get down on me for it. They'd say, why don't you try this instead for a little bit, and then you can get back to it when you're ready. You know, it wasn't super, they made it a lot easier. And it was the combo of their help plus my peers' help that really helped me get through that time. It was great to have, you know, people that support me that much, as well as the people on the other side of the screen who also are just like, go for it. It was super helpful.
So I'm not a first generation student, even though I'm the first one to do it like straight out of high school. And as far as support, so with my topic and the modern civil rights movement happening, me and my mom have had some of the best conversations. Because I'll be like watching the news and I'll be like, did you hear this happen? And then I'll just like start spitting out all of the research behind it. And I'm like, and it correlates to this. And we're just having this conversation back and forth. And I'm like, and it was just the best support possible.
So I'm also a first generational college student. And when I told my family that I got accepted into McNair, like everyone said they were excited, but they didn't know what it was. So after I explained it to them, my mom was still kind of shaky on it. But when she came to the ceremony and she saw like how it was a big deal, she felt good about it. And being at home doing my research, I've had a support system my whole life, but during this time, they've been there for real for me, because it has been days where I don't feel motivated or I'm not focused. And instead of getting beat down, it's just like, you'll get to it, and it's not pressure on you to be the greatest or whatever, just as long as you give your best effort. So that's what it's been.
Okay, I'm trying to find my window with what I think. Was there any other responses? No? Two more questions. We have a question from Leah. Great presentations. I did all that. Yeah, did awesome. I'm interested in how COVID-19 is making chronic problems worse and making them even more obvious. For any panelists, do you have thoughts on how COVID-19 is playing out with your research topic, or how it is affecting your research population? This question is also open to Korrey if you want to point out anything additional as this relates to your research. So how is COVID-19 affecting, for any of you, how is COVID-19 perhaps affecting your research populations in your respective topics?
COVID-19 has honestly helped my research. It's exposing the areas of, what's the term? I can't think of the term right now, but it deals like the fact that racism is everywhere, and it being in the healthcare system right now with COVID going on, it really just helped and complemented my project, seeing how it's really hard and it's not accessible for Black communities to get healthcare. I want to be an epidemiologist, so living in a pandemic and seeing all that's going on in the healthcare system, it's like when I get to that point in my career, I have this time period to reflect back on what could I've done differently or what could be done differently in case something like this happens again, as well as the areas where I should be putting my focus in from a policy standpoint.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Black communities and Latino and Hispanic communities are disproportionately being affected by COVID-19, and that's because a lot of them are working class, so they're going to be exposed to. I mean, a lot of them are essential workers, and they're going to be exposed to a lot of people who are carrying COVID, and a lot of them may not even show symptoms. So it's really hard to tell, and that affects even like those who have diabetes and pre-diabetes, and it just creates a lot of complications. So we're seeing that, and I don't know, I think what Korrey said, it's exposing a lot of like the disparities that we've already been talking about, but it's making it more like surreal, and I think a lot of people are now paying attention to it. And one example that comes to mind is my uncle. He is diabetic, and he had to apply for unemployment, but they weren't like giving him much aid. And so I'm thinking about how many other families that are going through like the same thing, who may have like underlying conditions and who can't live a normal life, or like can't go out just like how they used to, because they're afraid that if they do get COVID, it's going to affect them or even like be fatal. And it's really sad and scary. So that's kind of what we've been seeing, and I hope that there is more work that can be done to like just improve and save lives.
So as for education, COVID is really highlighting a lot of the way that things are currently done and how it's affecting students, because when you talk about the number of days lost to exclusionary discipline practices, you start thinking about how much schoolwork students are missing. And Black students have 5 times the number of days lost to these practices. So with that being said, they're already behind. So now you're learning through a computer. And let's not talk about the students who don't have computers, don't have Wi-Fi, the students who parents are essential workers, as Jackie just said, who aren't there to be like, all right, it's time to do that schoolwork. Or if you have a question, the teacher is not available, how do you help that? There's currently a news story going on about this teenager, and the headline is like, teenager put in juvenile detention because she missed schoolwork. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about that transgenerational trauma and the educational outcomes for Black students. Because yes, this student was currently on probation, but are we going to talk about the way that you're sending this child to juvie during a pandemic where you don't want people in jail as it is, because they're not answering when you say, hey, I think this person who just got here got symptoms, like they got to go. They're not worried about that. They're just worried about the fact that you're here. So how are we talking about the kids who are being placed in juvie for minor infractions, and then looking at the race of these kids and how they're being affected? So that's how COVID's affecting education, and that's just the top surface.
Okay. Are we ready to go to the, I also want to be conscious of time. We have about 10 more minutes. Were there any other responses to that last question before we go to our last question, before we go to our next and last question? Yeah, ready? Okay. You know, great responses, y'all. Y'all are doing awesome and opening my eyes a lot through your research and your insight. Our last question is from Rosemary Gray. I believe that's your faculty mentor, Laci. I think this is an awesome question to close this out. How has this Summer Institute influenced your future career plans? Either has it confirmed or changed your plans? And I'm interested, I would love to hear from everyone for this answer. If you want to answer.
I can start. Thanks, Rosemary. So the research that I've been doing, I've definitely felt passionate about it for a long time. Like I said, I've been in the borderline personality disorder lab since I was a freshman. And finally taking that leap to bridge some gaps in the literature between clinical populations and cognitive psychology has been very interesting. And now that I've done research on it, it's something that I can definitely see myself doing research on in graduate school. So it's been very influential in that way, because I could do this for another 4 or 6 years. But then on the other end of the spectrum, I don't want to do research as a career. And this process has sort of shown me that. And I think that that's a good thing for me personally, because research, it's very important. I look up to all of you guys that do it full-time as your jobs. I don't think it's for me though, and this process has sort of reinforced my desire to be out in the community and doing therapy rather than in the lab doing research. While I think they're equally important, I'm happy to have found my place, sort of.
The Summer Institute got me to look at Charlotte more intensely because they have an urban education program. And I kind of realized like, I want to teach, but I don't know that I want to teach in a classroom because I've kind of noticed that I think community and education should overlap and come together. And I think there's a lot of things that I can teach in, say, a community center that I can't necessarily teach in the classroom. Some of those life skills and how to really talk about this cycle and the communication that can be built with parents and families and students and children that I can have outside of the classroom that I can't necessarily have in that system. Because I think to break the system, you have to leave the system.
I'll say that this whole summer experience was really, it's really what cemented my ideas of going to grad school, because one thing that I know a few of us faced, you know, in the beginning and even further in was imposter syndrome, that feeling that like, I don't know if I belong here with all these people that are doing such great research. And that can be really prevalent in graduate school where you're surrounded by other people who are doing, you know, super important research and you might not feel that it's the same for you. So this experience really helped me realize that, you know, like maybe graduate school is for me. Like I wouldn't feel out of place in academia, which is super helpful because I did not feel that way before this point.
In the future, I definitely do see myself going to grad school, but I think for a career, I would love to just be a community health educator and sit on like on a team or like be a part of a team that creates intervention and involve different stakeholders to help us do that, and do a bit of assessment to see what's working, what's not working. I definitely do want to be involved with the community. So being like engaging with the community, and that's like we see that as our patients, like I feel like that's where I'll get the most fulfillment. And I would love to continue to do research, but I'm not sure if I could do that full time. Like Laci said, I have so much respect for y'all, like for those who are doing it right now and who love to do it. Like y'all are seriously the MVPs, but I cannot do that. I'm so sorry, I cannot. But yeah, shout out to y'all. Y'all are doing it.
Korrey, Marcus, who's next?
So for myself, I think my experience within my research, I would say confirmed and motivated my desires to want to go to medical school and to possibly, you know, do grad school as well. But, you know, my aspirations has been geared towards going to medical school because like I really want to make a difference within the community, like with health disparities, like, you know, not a lot of people, especially like Black people, are afforded the, you know, the resources and the opportunity to really get the health that the health that they need, you know, as opposed to other people. And so like my desire is to be able to be a part of that change that I want to see within the Black community and like contribute to that change and health disparities that exist within that.
For me, the SRI, it confirmed that I want to, you know, go to grad school and get my doctorate and things like that. But it also confirmed that I want to be in a lab. Doing a literature review and having to read all the literature and things like that, it really reassured me that I want to be in a lab. And I mean, it's not bad, but you know, it comes with the discipline. But I feel like being an epidemiologist, I can have an impact in both areas, kind of, so to speak. But doing this SRI, it really reassured a lot.
Well, great job, all. You know, going back to the purpose of SRI is to expose you all to this and help you make the best decisions about what your future can look like. And knowing that research can take many different forms in your career. So in either way, you all did an absolute great job, not only during summer research, but during this panel. So if I can ask you to give yourselves and each other a hand of applause, and our attendees, if you can continue to give them shout outs and applause. Please read the notes of encouragement if you have it in the chat function. You're getting lots of love. You all did great. And I thank you as panelists, I thank you as scholars, I thank our attendees, and I thank our faculty and library mentors and everybody who played a role in supporting our scholars through this summer journey, and who will continue to support our scholars through their research journey at UNCG and beyond. So great job. We are at time. Just perhaps one round of quickly, are there folks, maybe one or two people you would like to thank, scholars, to close this out?
There's so many people that I could thank, but thank you to my faculty mentors, they're in the audience. Thank you to my family, my mom, my stepmom are in the audience. Thank you to my cohort. Thank you to everybody for being so supportive.
Yeah. Nahdira.
I'd love to thank Dr. Kane, who's in the audience, I just realized, and I'm really excited to see you there. Like, hello, thank you. And I'd also like to thank my family, who I know are outside trying to be quiet. Yeah, it was just really great to have help from everyone who was super amazing throughout this whole process. Thank you.
Thanks. Jackie.
Yes, a big shout out to my cohort, because there was a lot of times where I was in distress, and y'all just kept me sane and were really, really supportive. So thank y'all. And shout out to my faculty mentor, Dr. Echeverria. I've learned so much from you, and you're just an overall amazing person. So thank you so much.
Korrey.
Thank you to the cohort. Thank you to Dr. Grandma. Thank you to Sam Harlow, and thank you to Dr. Michael Hill.
Demi.
Thank you, Dr. Holzberg, and thank you to my girlfriend and my family.
And take us home, Marcus.
I would like to thank my faculty mentor, Dr. Marr, for pushing me, for allowing me to grow and develop within my research. I would like to thank my cohort, because, you know, you kept me sane, you know, you supported me in many ways that I can count. So I would like to thank y'all as well.
Good job. Well, congratulations all. And I am going to